Good afternoon. This is Dr. Choi MD, PhD from South Korea. Today's topic is about South Korea's stance on Ukraine war. As a psychiatrist who is especially specialized in group dynamics and mass psychology, especially on international interactions and propaganda, I have some different views when looking into the most current public attention-focused issues like the Russia's special military operation against Ukraine, which is in fact an unprovoked war and massive violence. As you realize, in the realm of the psychological warfare propaganda terms, it is better to be defined as a special military operation than a brutal war. As the British Malayan independence war, which occurred 74 years ago, was then designated as Malayan emergency or insurgency, Malayan insurgency, which raged since 1948 till 1960. And regretfully, until now, it is officially still not a war. I am absolutely not, never, pro-Russian or Soviet fascist son of a gun rascal, but I sometimes shift my gears to a quite seriously neutral position when estimating not only such worldwide sophisticated matters, but also in evaluating my own trivial ideologies involving my everyday decision makings. South Korea was reluctant in imposing economic sanctions to Russia, and after a fierce condemnation, it finally participated, but was hit by international criticisms. What kinds of aids is the South Korean government providing Ukraine? But there are some ambiguous properties, unfair to simply apply the strict sanctions towards South Korea due to the nation's reluctance. For example, as for India, which is a member of the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue Alliance that includes 4 nations of Japan, Australia, United States of America, and India, India had the obligation for prompt action against Russian invasion of Ukraine. But unfortunately, India withdrew from the United Nations resolution condemning against Russia's Ukraine invasion. But surprisingly, no additional sanctions or international criticisms were imposed to India. Whatever whilst South Korea did the same, but had been inflicted by, not much, by slight damage of transitory global sanctions. Even the United States President Biden advocated India by claiming that due to the international interest and relations that has been the long-standing ties between Russia and India that, looking back for India by United States, is comprehensible and pardonable. I too accept, and I am too sympathetic with the predicament the Indian government is under right now, because for decades of having been a non-aligned nation and had to depend heavily on Soviet-manufactured weaponry system, this can't be suddenly reversed though India, it cannot be suddenly reversed, though India is the spearhead front line of Quad nation, because it contains such possible outbreak of collision with the expansionistic China, right at the line of actual control demarcation border in North India and South China, right? That's called LAC. And the India's military weakness will become an imminent threat to the liberalistic nations. India constantly needs its weaponry parts from Russia desperately to fight China. This is such a controversy. Situation in South Korea is not as serious as in India, but some problem exists. It may sound as a clumsy excuse, but some facts are critical for South Korea's role in managing North-East balance of power. The Far East consists of superpowers such as Russia, China, Japan, and the United States West Pacific Front. The power balance here is, in fact, has been stabilized in the 1990s by efforts at the time Soviet Russian and South Korea's cooperative relationships. The USSR was a culprit which instigated the Korean War in 1950 by ordering the puppet leader of the North Korea, Kim Il-sung, to carry out a surprise invasion into the South. But now, by the end stage of the Soviet era, both nations, South Korea and Russia, or old Soviet, had established a commendable favorite attitude. To put it easily, the circumstances which was established between Russia and South Korea, which stabilized military tensions and increased mutual interest, substantially contributed to the stability of the Far East, holding the balance of power over 30 years since 1990s, deterring the reckless North Korea's provocation towards South Korea, and over that, deterring the communist China's expansionistic ambitions towards South Korea and also Japan and even the South Pacific Asian countries. Thus, South Korea's participations in the sanctions against Russia imposes ironically imposes some burden, although not severe, to South Korea. Japan is in a relatively free position than South Korea because the official main military opponent of Japan is Russia itself. However, concerning the Xi Jinping's Communist China, if not the Russians are involved directly in the backup of the development of the North Korea's illegal nuclear heads and the intercontinental ballistic missile productions, South Korea's main bitter enemy is not Russia. But there are clear evidence that Communist China had and is still providing material and technologies that are turning out to be alleged. And although North Korea is sanctioned strictly by the global society, and for the several years during mutual border closure due to the corona pandemic, China recently resumed the sneaky feeding and saving Kim Jong-un's North Korean regime surreptitiously since about 3 months ago. Recently, in April 11, 2022, Ukrainian President Zelensky delivered a video speech to the members of the Korean parliament members. These virtual addresses deeply impressed many nations, Congress, and parliaments, but not in Korea. After watching the video speech at Korean parliament being broadcasted through the South Korean public airwaves, waves of rage by Korean viewers burst out. Why? The reason why? Unlike the response from the United States or United Kingdom or other European national assemblies, very few Korean MPs were present at the parliament, and the MPs attending the ceremony looked very apathetic. Even texting private message over their smartphones while Zelensky was speaking. Moreover, there was no standing ovation. I understand the South Korean audiences rest on the Korean MP's attitude, but also, to be honest, in my personal opinion, they revealed the Ukrainian President Zelensky's manneristic atmosphere, and Zelensky's address to the Korean MPs was some kind of a problem. For example, the word South Korea. The word South Korea was mentioned only two times during this long speech, and more, the remaining contents were just a stereotypic repetition, which we heard in thousands of times in other speeches at other circumstances. why I am little critical about this matter is not to blame the war-weary Ukraine President Zelensky, but to encourage him to utilize more upgraded and delicate tactics. Ukraine and South Korea share some appealing common interests together. You may remember a noisy commotion concerning the handling over of the Poland's 28 Soviet-made MiG-29s, the MiG Falcon, to Ukraine Air Force, which is still going under a continuous controversy. But did you know that, or ever heard that the South Korean army possesses and armed with about 31 T-80U Soviet-made main battle tanks and about 33 BMP, Soviet amphibious tracked infantry fighting vehicles that are also upgraded by the world's leading South Korean defense industries. South Korea has those weaponry. This acted as a great deterrence and horrified the North Korean counterparts, which were armed with obsolete Soviet and Chinese-made tanks. Russia was now cooperating with South Korea, not the North. South Korea acquired them from Russia around the year of 1966, and this Korean modified T-80Us might be superb than the Russian T-90 that are dispatched to the Ukraine battlefield. 31 T-80U tanks and 33 BMP constitutes two fully equipped armored battalion at least. Anyway, there is news in April 14th. It was confirmed that Ukraine really asked for this weaponry between talks by both nations' defense ministry. There are more interesting stories about the tales of two nations. Tales of two nations. By the time of collapse of USSR, two new Soviet aircraft carriers were under production in the part of Ukraine. Funny story. Two aircraft carriers, which had to halt due to the lack of the source of revenues. South Korea asked Ukraine that time to sell one of the constructing aircraft carrier to South Korea, which was named Barak to Korea. But this proposal was turned down by Ukraine. Eventually, instead of going to South Korea to reinforce its military potentials, instead this Barak went into Communist China's hand, and it became Communist China's historical first aircraft carrier ever, denominated Liaoning Liaoning from Barak. And now this aircraft carrier is of great threat to Korea, Japan, and the United States, and to the most countries in the South China Sea, Asian allies of ours. I'll see you in the next episode titled, not such good one, but titled that Ukraine might lose the oncoming battle. If not, UN peacekeeping force and reconstruction organizations make a swift move deeply inside to the Ukraine territory, even though the Russian troops are in prisons there. UN Peace Corps and reconstruction organizations and the Red Cross and all those things should be stationed in Ukraine mainland. That's the reason is that I'm a Korean, I'm a South Korean. Unlike the lucky South Korea, which extremely organized United Nations unified force intervened in the 1950s Korean War, and which is still in action in Southern Korean soil, is doing a great role. The reason is South Korea could enjoy its peaceful and safe reconstruction time under the guide of the protection by the United Nations. But what I worry is that Ukraine is unfortunately never assisted by the United Nations, UN, and there are too many military factions, official or unofficial, I don't know, too many military factions, and they are heavily armed and growing in great strengths, besides the legitimate Zelensky's Ukraine government army. This may wage a civil war inside Ukraine even after the glorious victory is gained by Ukraine against the Russian invaders. Anyway, thank you for listening, and Slava Ukraini! See you next time. Goodbye.